He's voted to ban all kinds of shotguns, all kinds of rifles, a huge variety of handguns. So people were understandably concerned and wanted to buy things while they still could.
Something magnificent happened, 15 years ago. Bill Clinton signed a so-called assault weapons ban. It has now largely been eliminated. It's sunsetted out, and I'm glad we have. Now we can buy magazines and we can buy our so-called assault weapons again. But that, more than anything else, ushered in the Republican Revolution back in 1994. And I know there's a lot of talk about Newt Gingrich and everything he did with Contract with America, but I want us to go back to that day when Bill Clinton signed that and what led to the Republican takeover of Congress. I think very few people realize what a backlash that was. And it wasn't Newt Gingrich, it wasn't the contract, it was gun owners. Well,
it was a variety of things. I mean, Newt Gingrich had done a good job of recruiting good Republican candidates and of putting the Republicans on the ideological offensive to some degree, which they'd been kind of torpid in Congress under Bob Michael's leadership before Gingrich. But when Clinton was pushing the assault weapon ban, so-called assault weapons, it had nothing to do with what's defined by the Defense Intelligence Agency as real assault weapons, but guns that look like machine guns, even though they function like ordinary guns. As this was being fought out in Congress in August of 1994, Speaker of the House Tom Foley and Majority Leader Dick Gephardt went down to the White House and told President Clinton, I know you want to push this big crime bill, take the gun ban stuff out of it. It's going to be a tough vote to even win in Congress, and even if we do win it, you're going to make it really bad for Democrats this fall in the election. And President Clinton consulted his pollster, Stanley Greenberg, and Greenberg said, nah, gun banning is very popular. Not a single Democrat is going to lose his seat as a result of this. What it turned out as a result was that both the U.S. House, for the first time in nearly half a century, and the U.S. Senate flipped to Republican control in the '94 elections. Bill Clinton in December 1994 said that the NRA is the reason the Republicans now control the United States House of Representatives.
That being the case then, my guess is Nancy Pelosi has wised up and does not want a repeat of 1994 in 2010. And I don't think, this is my speculation, tell me if you think I'm right. My speculation is we're not going to see anything that draconian coming out of Congress between now and November of 2010. What, you think I'm right? Let's say out of Congress.
I think it's not the intent. I mean, Harry Reid, who's the Senate Majority Leader, actually has a pretty good, being a Nevada senator, a pretty good record on gun issues, and was actually one of the people who was a leader in the tort reform law that Senator Obama voted against. And Speaker Pelosi certainly personally has a terrible record on the issue, but I think both of them recognize that the reason that there are such substantial Democratic majorities in the Congress right now is because the party is now big enough to have room for pro-gun Democrats. You know, back in the '94 election, not a single Democrat was the worst year for Democrats, you know, in at least half a century, maybe more. Not a single Democrat who was endorsed by not a single Democratic congressional incumbent who was endorsed by the National Rifle Association lost an election. So that really showed sort of the power of the pro-Second Amendment vote there. And Pelosi and Reid recognized that. And so, for that matter, to Rahm Emanuel, who was the chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, which through now 3 cycles in a row has been adding House seats for Democrats, and of Charles Schumer, his counterpart on the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee. You know, Schumer and Emanuel are about the most unpro-gun people you could find. But they're also very, very politically savvy. And they said, you know, we want to win purple districts. We want to maybe pick up seats in red states. We're not going to do that by coming on the culture wars.
My assertion that we gunnies, those of us who want to work on our Second Amendment rights, we should sleep easy, right? We can out carry in national parks, depending on the state. We both seem to agree that a lot of Democrats who are savvy about such things will not pass any overt gun control laws, at least not in the near term. So we should sleep well, he asks.
Well, as Rahm Emanuel said, you never want to let a good crisis go to waste. And there is certainly a possibility that there may be some kind of terrorist attack or other kind of atrocious crime that'll be a huge public issue, and that is when the Dianne Feinsteins in the Senate and when President Obama, that's when it'll be politically opportune for them to start pushing for draconian measures and try to push them through probably as fast as possible before there's time for considered reflection on the part of the American people. I mean, certainly if Al Gore had been president in 2001, the Gore version of the Patriot Act, follow on to the terrible Clinton-Gore so-called terrorism bill in 1996, the Gore Patriot Act would have had a lot of anti-gun provisions in it. And the other thing is there's a lot that can be done administratively where you don't need to get consent from Congress.
This is the part I want to get into, in that we forget we got three branches of government. The guys who enforce the laws we have right now, the guy who's in charge of all the administrative branches, including alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, is the big man himself, Obama, who, despite what he said during the campaign, you saw the ad, didn't you? When he looked in the camera and he said, "I'm going to protect your Second Amendment rights." Now, I thought that was an amazing claim when he said, "I'm going to protect your Second Amendment rights," seeing that he never once voted, as far as I can tell.
He did once. He voted along with about 90 other senators, almost 90, in favor of a bill to say that federal funds couldn't be used for illegal gun confiscation after a natural disaster. That if the law says you can confiscate the guns, that's fine, but if there's no legal authorization for gun confiscation, you can't spend federal funds on that. So he did vote the right way on that.
Because once, but he's also in charge of the administration, including the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, including the FBI and the Attorney General's office. Give me some of the inside information here. What should we be on the lookout, and has he made any policy changes thus far?
Well, a big one's coming down from the United States Customs Bureau, which has authority over knives, which also happen to be arms within the Second Amendment meaning. And the Customs Bureau has announced some rulings changes, which, unless they're stopped and the train's moving and Customs hasn't shown any intention of wavering, will outlaw about 80% of folding knives in the United States. It would define these folding
pocket knives.
Right. It would define about 80% of them as switchblades, so-called. The Federal Switchblades Act of 1958 prohibits the importation or the interstate transfer of folding knives. So you would have 80% of the existing folding knives that are manufactured or imported in the United States would suddenly become illegal.
For instance, here in Colorado, we've got a great knife manufacturer. It's out in Golden, Spyderco. Spyderco is been one of the top knife makers in America. They make some high-quality knives with a big, huge thumb hole in the center that you can flip open with one hand. Now, when I was a stagehand, when I actually had a real job, this was very handy, having a knife that I could open up with one hand because I'm there tying a rope and I need to cut something. I pull out my knife with one hand, I pop it open, off I go. It's the same thing as box cutters and utility knives where you have one, you can open it up with one hand. You're telling me that these are now switchblades?
The Customs would redefine them as switchblades, even though they don't use a spring, which you would think would be sort of the core of what a switchblade is. And there's been lots of Customs rulings where manufacturers say, "Oh, here's my knife. Here's how it works. Can I import it?" And Customs writes say a 3-page letter that explains why this particular mechanism on the knife does not count as a switchblade. And all of these would be wiped away by what Customs has proposed to do. They announced it on May 21st. The comment period closed June 21st. So unless something changes within a matter of weeks.
This is purely an administrative thing. This is not a congressional vote. You can call your senator, you can call your congressman, but really, this is Obama's team that's doing this.
And nothing can stop them if they choose to stick with this. Now, 80 members of the U.S. House have already written to Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano and said, please stop this from happening. But all they can do is say, please. Congress would have to pass a new law changing the federal switchblade statute.
Pocket knives.
Pocket knives.
Pocket knives.
Yes.
That's it. A pocket knife.
No, we're not talking samurai swords or big, long, dangerous
we're not talking
knives.
Star Wars lightsabers here. We're just talking about a folding knife that opens locks and you close it. That's
yes.
it.